This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. Sudan's military to reinstate ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. Gunman shot dead and at least 2 people wounded in Jerusalem shooting attack. And protesters rally against COVID-19 restrictions across Europe. Let's start off in Sudan, where mediators say the military and civilian political parties have reached a deal to ease the political unrest. As a result of the agreement, the military plans to reinstate ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who was placed under house arrest since the military takeover on October the 25th. Fadla Burma Nasir, the head of the Umma party, confirmed the deal. In it, Hamdok will form an independent cabinet of technocrats, and all political detainees will also be released. On Sunday, the Sovereign Council will hold an urgent meeting to discuss and formally announce the details of the deal. The developments follow weeks of anti-military protests in which at least 40 people have been killed. Well, CGTN's Naba Mohideen is following those developments from the capital, Khartoum. Naba, what do we know about the deal?
Thanks, Beatrice. The deal came after internal efforts between different political bodies inside Sudan and some unions and some independent people like professors of universities and a lot of unions. So the deal is to make a middle solution between the political forces and between the military. And the deal also said all of the political detainees will be released and Hamdok will appoint a government out of technocrats, and a meeting will be held after this declaration to appoint Hamdok formally. It came after a lot of protests and a lot of anger against the military unilateral decision, but also it's excluding the FFC forces, which is Freedom and Change forces, that the umbrella that backed the protests against al-Bashir. So the deal, it seems to be like made by internal efforts and internal initiatives to make a solution for the political crisis Sudan is witnessing for almost a month.
So, Naba, what do we expect, though, in the coming days? Because how soon can we expect to see this deal being implemented?
Actually, people and observers also expecting more turmoil and more complications because the deal, it seems to be like came suddenly after a lot of promises by the military saying that they will release Hamdok and they will reinstate the constitutional draft. So it's not clear the background of the deal itself, and at the same time the Freedom and Change Alliance is calling for more protests because, as I said, it's excluded out of the political scene. So we may see more turmoil and more protests. In the same side, or in another hand, the protesters say reinstating Abdallah Hamdok alone is not enough. It was one of the demands, but it's not the solo demand by the pro-democracy groups, especially after the killing of 40 protesters in the past protests since the military took over the power. Now the demands are about justice, are about investigations, are about adhering the constitutional draft, and about the punishment for the people who killed the protesters, and about excluding the military out of the political scene, and and completing the path for the democratic change without the military interfering in the political scene. This is the demands of the protesters. So with the absence of those demands by Freedom and Change Alliance and protesters, we will see more protests and more tensions, because protesters and Freedom and Change Alliance are very big blocks and are affecting the street and affecting the political scene in the country.
Naba Mohideen joining us there from Khartoum. Thank you. Now, one person has been killed and at least 2 civilians injured in an attack in the old city of Jerusalem. The attack took place at the chain gate of the city on Sunday morning. According to local media, the attack was carried out by a Palestinian man in his 40s, armed with a machine gun and a knife. Police officers at the scene opened fire at the shooter and killed him. Police immediately closed the site to visitors following the incident. Public Security Minister Omar Balev says the attacker was affiliated with Hamas. Well, let's cross over to Stephanie Fried. She's in Tel Aviv for us. She's joining us via Skype. Stephanie, what more details do we have about this particular attack?
Well, Beatrice, adding to some of the details that you've given us, the incident happened a few hours ago in Jerusalem. It's the second time within days that there has been an attack like this. A few days ago, there was a Palestinian attack on Israeli, stabbing attack. Now this was with, as you said, a submachine gun, a Beretta M12 submachine gun, and that can fire 550 rounds per minute. One Israeli was killed. The reports here say that 4 have been wounded. And then the gunman, who, as you noted, Beatrice, is reportedly affiliated with Hamas. He was killed in the attack. The Hamas spokesperson in Gaza has praised the attack, has said that it will not let up attacks like this until, quote, the enemy, the foreign occupier of holy sites, of Jerusalem sites, relinquishes, moves back, gives up the fight, so to speak. Right now, of course, security enforcement in Jerusalem. This is all happening in the vicinity of the holiest sites to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, within a few hundred meters of the entrance to Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is Islam's 3rd holiest site. Israel's Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, reacting a few hours after this latest attack, is saying that Israel will be vigilant, and he has instructed security forces to mobilize accordingly, and again, to demonstrate vigilance. And again, just back to this person, he was in his 40s, the gunman. He was from a nearby refugee camp. He has, again, been identified as a political affiliate of Hamas, Beatrice.
All right. Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv for us. Thank you. Meanwhile, Hamas has issued a statement condemning the UK's decision to classify it as a terror group. They say it proves the UK is biased towards Israel. The Palestinian Foreign Affairs Ministry is calling the UK's decision a continuation of the inexplicable aggressive policy towards the Palestinian people. Criticism has also come from Lebanon's Hezbollah movement. UK Home Secretary Priti Patel announced the decision on Friday. Under the British Terrorism Act, this will mean that any expression of support for Hamas could face up to 14 years in jail. This includes flying their flag or holding a meeting for the organization. Hamas is one of the largest militant groups in Palestine. It has been in control of Gaza since 2007. The UK's position brings it in line with the US and the European Union. Guy Henderson tells us more.
The US and EU had already banned Hamas outright. On a trip to Washington, Britain's Home Affairs Minister announced plans to join them.
Hamas has significant terrorist capability, including access to extensive and sophisticated weaponry, as well as terrorist training facilities, and it has long been involved in significant terrorist violence. But the current listing of Hamas creates an artificial distinction between various parts of that organisation. It is right that that listing is updated to reflect this.
Britain's current ban extends only to the group's military wing. If Parliament approves this latest move, its political arm too will be designated a terrorist organisation. Overt support for it could also lead to jail time. In Gaza, Hamas condemned the decision.
This is a condemnation of our Palestinian right to defend ourselves and all people who fight for their rights. If this decision is implemented, then it is a political and ethical mistake and unlawful by Britain, added to its first crime when they had the Balfour Declaration. This step is to satisfy the occupation and support its crimes against our people. It is also a denial of our legal rights.
It comes months after the worst flare-up in violence between Hamas and Israel in years, fighting that left at least 260 Palestinians and 13 Israelis dead. Britain's shift in stance leaves the group and the Gaza Strip it still dominates, ever more isolated. Guy Henderson, CGTN.
Poland has said the number of migrants trying to enter from Belarus continues to fall. The Polish border guard said there were fewer than 200 attempts on Friday. That's down from 250 on Thursday and over 500 the day before. It comes after days of intensive diplomatic activity and violent clashes. Thousands of migrants have left their encampment along the border. Some have been repatriated to Iraq and others allowed to take up shelter in a nearby government warehouse and barracks. But authorities from the International Organization for Migration said the migrants are still in need of basic commodities.
It was the most humane step to take in the current situation, especially taking into account harsh weather conditions. But at the same time, we would like to say that these people need to be provided with minimum living standards.
Mexican authorities have found some 600 migrants from 12 countries crammed into 2 tractor trailers. Migration authorities say the majority were from neighboring Guatemala. Some were from other Latin American countries, such as Honduras and the Dominican Republic. Some were from countries as far away as Bangladesh and India. Most were heading to the U.S., looking to escape poverty or violence in their homelands. The authorities say the migrants will either be sent home or be given a chance to apply for legal stay in Mexico. While the death toll from a record flooding in Western Canada has risen to 4, with the 5th person still missing. Torrential rains hit southwestern British Columbia last Sunday and Monday, causing widespread flooding and landslides. Thousands of people have been displaced. The search for another missing man is being hampered by weather conditions. Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thank you for watching.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan's military is set to reinstate ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken winds up his Africa tour. And protesters block a convoy of French troops in Burkina Faso as anger mounts over their inability to stop violence by militants. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program. In business news, DRC President Felix Tshisekedi demands a ban on issuance of new mining permits in the latest effort to fight fraud. And in sports, Qatar begins its one-year countdown to the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Let's take you to Sudan, where mediators say the military and civilian political parties have reached a deal to ease the political unrest. As a result of the agreement, the military plans to reinstate ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who was placed under house arrest since the military takeover on October the 25th. Fadala Burma Nasir, the head of the Umar party, confirmed the deal. In it, Hamdok will form an independent cabinet of technocrats, and all political detainees will also be released. The Forces of Freedom and Change has been excluded from the deal. On Sunday, the Sovereign Council will hold an urgent meeting to discuss and formally announce the details of the agreement. The developments follow weeks of anti-military protests in which at least 40 people have been killed. The protesters say reinstating the Prime Minister is not enough and want change without the military. It is, however, not clear when the deal will be implemented. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has expressed deep concern about the stability of Mali following 2 coups in 18 months. Speaking while in Senegal's capital, Dakar, Blinken urged Mali to return to constitutional rule through democratic elections. The U.S. Secretary of State also raised his concern about the continuing fighting in Ethiopia. Blinken says intensive diplomacy is underway with the leadership of the African Union. This includes assisting with humanitarian access for the millions of people in Northern Europe. Ethiopia.
Let me just say quickly, in Ethiopia, intensive diplomacy is ongoing with leadership from the African Union and its High Representative, former Nigerian President Obasanjo, supported by the United States, including through engagement by our Special Envoy Jeff Feltman, who's in Addis as we speak. We continue to push for an immediate end to hostilities without preconditions and humanitarian access for the millions of people in northern Ethiopia who need life-saving aid. And we continue to urge Americans to avail themselves of commercial flights out of the country, and we're providing assistance to them to do so. We're working to encourage the restoration of safety and security for the Malayan people and a successful transition toward democratic governance in Mali. I would only add that I think it would be especially unfortunate if outside actors engaged in making things even more difficult and more complicated. And I'm thinking particularly of groups like the Wagner Group in Mali. But we are looking for Mali to move forward on its transition.
Well, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Africa was dominated by issues of insecurity, climate change, and the deadly COVID-19 pandemic. While CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy wraps up the highlights of his visit.
We have real concerns about Russia's unusual military activity on the border with Ukraine. We have real concerns about some of the rhetoric we're seeing and hearing from Russia, as well as in social media. We don't know what President Putin's intentions are, but we do know what's happened in the past. We do know the playbook of trying to cite some illusory provocation from Ukraine or any other country, and then using that as an excuse to do what Russia is planning to do all along. And so, as a result of what we've seen, as a result of that history, we've been in very close consultation with partners throughout Europe. I can tell you that there's a widely shared concern and a real focus on that concern.
Blinken's visits to Kenya, Nigeria and Senegal follow months of Washington's attempts to ease tensions in Ethiopia and Sudan. In Kenya, Blinken discussed shared interest with the East African nation as members of the UN Security Council, including addressing the unrest in Ethiopia and Sudan. International relations experts say Blinken's trip to Africa was aimed in part at raising Washington's profile as a player in regional and international initiatives.
I would hope that Blinken took away from here, particularly the discussions with President Kenyatta, that maybe the United Nations with the big powers that are involved, agreeing, coming together to help all the sides in the conflict to agree that they need to have a major conference or discussion place.
What remains clear to many is that military confrontation in both situations may not resolve the unrest.
It does not help very much to issue a lot of threats because some of these people are used to threats anyway. So, but they need to be pressured, to be persuaded to see sense that they need to agree on the future of their federalism.
In Abuja, Blinken and Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari discussed collaborating on international health security, expanding energy access and security. In Senegal, the U.S. Secretary of State spoke about the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to build a stronger system to prevent the next pandemic. Blinken pledged to work with African countries to address the escalating climate crisis on the continent. Despite calls for a more aggressive approach to the security situation in the region, the U.S. Secretary of State did not disclose what further steps Washington may take to influence events in East Africa. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's discuss this further with Dr. David Monyai, an international relations and foreign policy expert. Dr. Monyai, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has concluded his Africa tour, which sought to improve cooperation between the two partners. What has the visit achieved?
I think it has achieved a number of things. Firstly, I think we're starting to see much more positive signals shifting away from your Trump position, which was geared towards countering China's activities on the African continent. This time around, it appears that the Biden administration is much more focused on improving the relationship with Africa at a time when it really needs to beef up, particularly on issues of trade.
Well, he held talks with officials in Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal. How did Africa respond to the visit?
I think Africa is starting to see changes. The positive is the tone of the speech. It's less condescending compared to Donald Trump administration. I think that is most welcome. However, there's also a negative part. The negative, I think, from Africans is that Africa is right at the bottom of the rank in terms of importance to US. Biden has been in power almost a year, and it's only now he comes up with the Africa policy. And that really speaks volumes in terms of how US sees Africa at the moment. But overall, it's a positive move where United States come on its own without really competing with China, looking at strictly United States-Africa relation.
So let's look at that U.S.-Africa relations, because following the visit, though, would you say there is any significant shift in how the U.S. now sees and interacts with Africa?
I think the direct, some of the views that he mentioned was that it's time that the United States does not demand Africans to choose between Washington and Beijing. I think that in itself it speaks volumes. The second significant factor is that United States has to compete with all other players, including China, on key issues. I think we're going to see more, I think for Africans or to the benefit of Africa, in terms of pricing, whether it's in IT or infrastructure development. I think we need to see much more stiff competition between the United States and China, and allowing Africans to have much more room and maneuverability in terms of who should they choose, not based on ideology, but based on price. The one that comes with good project at a price that Africans choose.
Dr. David Monyai, thank you. Well, let's now take you to Burkina Faso, where a convoy of French troops has been stopped en route to Niger by a human barricade of protesters. The demonstrators are expressing rage, anger and disappointment over France's involvement in a regional conflict with jihadists. They say France should do more to help restore peace and stability in Burkina Faso. CGTN's Tulisha Balala has the details.
Protesters in Burkina Faso are furious over the rising violence caused by Islamist militants in the country, and to show their frustrations with the French troops who are in the region to fight the militants, hundreds of protesters blocked the path of the French armed vehicles in the town of Kaya. Some of the protesters voiced conspiracy theories alleging that the French work with the militants.
This concerns all of Africa, not only Burkina Faso. We came out today to say we are fed up with the French army. They should stop playing with Africa. We cannot suffer under the sun while their children are comfortable over there. They have everything they want. However, they still come here and exploit our resources, and we are not comfortable. For us Africans, we can do this job of security. We thank the French army. They should take back what they put down here and go home. The end. Thank you.
We know they are our enemies. We asked them to open their vehicles so that we can have an idea of the contents. They refused. We know what is inside, suspect items. They should apologize, change countries and go far from us.
France intervened in neighboring Mali in 2013 with the aim of battling an Islamist insurgency in the region. Militants linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State have, however, been able to strengthen their foothold and expand into countries such as Burkina Faso and Niger. Last week, state security forces in Burkina Faso suffered their heaviest loss in years, after gunmen killed about 49 military police officers and 4 civilians. But France says it is currently in the process of increasing its previous troop strength in the Sahel to about 2,500 to 3,000 soldiers. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Former South African President F.W. de Klerk, who died in Cape Town after losing his battle with cancer at the age of 85 last week, is being laid to rest today. Security is expected to be tight at his private funeral, which will be attended by family and friends with no media allowed. Renee Delcam reports.
As South Africa's last white apartheid-era president, F.W. de Klerk remained a controversial figure until the day he died. He will go down in history as the apartheid leader who freed Nelson Mandela in 1990. He shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Mandela in 1993 and who played a key role in negotiating a new dispensation for a new South Africa in 1994. But there are many people in South Africa who will always remember F.W. de Klerk as an apartheid leader with blood on his hands. Although the former statesman had qualified for a state funeral, his wife and family chose to arrange a private cremation for him instead. Both his family and the F.W. de Klerk Foundation have remained tight-lipped about the details of the funeral arrangements. But de Klerk ensured that his voice was heard after his death. In a final video message to the people of South Africa, he apologized for the pain, hurt and indignity which apartheid had inflicted upon people of color in South Africa. But as he is laid to rest today, There are many who believe that de Klerk's apology was too little, too late. President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a mourning period in South Africa since de Klerk's death on the 11th of November, and flags in the country will fly at half-mast until after his funeral today. Renat Al-Kam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Further afield, demonstrators are taking to the streets across Europe as new restrictions are introduced. The World Health Organization is highlighting an increase in deaths in the region. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich reports.
Protesters in Austria calling for freedom. It's a message being made loud and clear across Europe. The anger stems from new measures to combat the continent's latest surge. Those voicing outrage see the policies as an attack on their civil liberties.
I want my freedom back. One would think we live in a democracy, but now this is a coronavirus dictatorship.
Austria was the first country in Western Europe to reimpose lockdown restrictions. Chancellor Alexander Schallenberg also announced it would be the first in the world to make vaccines compulsory. Austria has one of the lowest vaccination rates in Western Europe.
This will begin February 1st, 2022, substantially increasing vaccination rates, and I think we all agree on this, is our only way out of this vicious cycle of virus waves and lockdown discussions once and for all. We don't want a fifth wave, we don't want a sixth and seventh wave.
The move sparked Saturday's protests. Critics in Austria are denouncing such measures as an attack on self-determination. Its rhetoric being heard across Europe, like at this demonstration on Saturday in the Croatian capital Zagreb.
I came here to fight for freedom. I came here to fight against fascism. I came to fight against totalitarianism and these insane restrictions and insane politicians.
Lockdown rules have been an explosive issue in the Netherlands as well. Demonstrators in The Hague on Saturday rioted for a second night. Police on Friday fired warning shots and turned the water cannon on other protesters in Rotterdam. People have been taking to the streets across the country over new partial lockdown orders. Protests also broke out in the North Macedonian capital Skopje. It was after the government floated requiring health workers and other federal employees to get vaccinated. Not even half of the country has received both jabs. The World Health Organization for weeks has been voicing its concern over the growing numbers. Its weekly report published Tuesday found the region is the only in the world seeing an increase in deaths. European leaders have been rolling out new measures like vaccine passports and mandates to curb fatalities and free up intensive care units. The resulting outrage has presented a new challenge: how to combat a pandemic without further dividing a public already exhausted by lockdowns and restrictions. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Youth in South Africa struggle to make a living as the pandemic renders many people jobless. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the lives of nearly every person in the world. For instance, many people have seen their employment opportunities reduced, either due to job losses or closure of business. Some lost their livelihood after losing their jobs, while many had to seek other opportunities in order to survive. In South Africa, we tell a story of one such young person. CGTN's Elisa Njamela has that story.
The COVID-19 pandemic has proven to be quite detrimental to many small businesses. Many of them had no choice but to close down. Some, like Dave Itsopo, got retrenched as businesses struggled to survive. After South Africa went into its first lockdown, Tsopo lost his job as a cleaner at a Johannesburg restaurant. His retrenchment couldn't have come at a worse time.
My son was 1 month old when I was retrenched, and my wife was on maternity leave. She was earning half salary. So yeah, things were a bit hectic. So what actually happened when I lost my job, I told my neighbor, doctor, that I've lost my job, and he was like, "You know what, Davy? There's nothing I can do for you at the moment because things are a bit tough. The only thing I can do for you now is I'll give you my Wi-Fi password so that you keep your mind busy by watching funny videos on YouTube." So during lockdown level 5, everyone was stuck at home. TV was boring. We were searching for new channels. That's when we started watching Cake Boss.
Tsoko got hooked on the Cake Boss videos. When he tried on his own, he had a few false starts, but soon found his way and established Cakey by Davy with the help of former colleagues, neighbors, and even anonymous supporters. He says he used to only manage to make about $4 to $5 on cupcake, but her friend purchased the cake for almost $17.
One of my long-time friends, Charlotte, she was like, "Davy, I can see you're trying something. You lost your job, but I want to support you. Please bake a cake for me." She took that cake, she posted that cake on her Instagram. Then she tagged me, "Guys, support Davy. He lost his job with a newly born baby, and he's baking amazing cakes."
After that, Cakey by Davy simply exploded.
People started following me on Instagram, like, "Hey, Davy, do you have food? Do you have baby food, baby clothes? We want to order a cake." I started getting lots of support from different parts of the world. Talking of America, South Africa as a whole, like Europe, Asia, people ordering cakes for their families. Like, they would ask me, "How much am I charging?" And maybe I was charging 150, 250 and 350. Some they would pay double the amount, some they could pay triple.
Tsopo is now working hard towards opening his own bakery. Yodisa Njambela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The world marked World Children's Day on Saturday. Each year, roughly 1.4 million children worldwide are deprived of liberty in police cells, pre-trial detention and prisons. In some cases, minors lack legal and psychological support and are often held in demeaning and even dangerous conditions. CGTN's Panorama Africa looked at the situation here in Kenya and found that while there is still room for improvement, steps are being taken to improve juvenile justice.
There are two main reasons why children find themselves on the wrong side of the law: poverty and a breakdown in social structures, conditions that are prevalent in slums across Africa. In this episode of Panorama Africa, we take a look at what happens when children get caught up in the wheels of justice.
They took me and they told me I had been charged with the possession of firearms without a license. They told me I was a member of Al-Shabaab.
On the outskirts of Nairobi lies an institution dedicated to the rehabilitation of street boys and those who've come into conflict with the law. This is where James has been living for the past year. How James got here is the story of a broken family, abuse and poverty. Born and raised in a rural county in southwestern Kenya, James's parents separated before his 11th birthday. He chose to stay with his father, but life soon changed when his father remarried and began to abuse alcohol. Alone and just 12 years old, James made the 350-kilometer bus trip to the capital city, Nairobi, in search of his mother. But with little money or information, he landed
If you want to sleep, you sleep in a sack. When the policemen find you, they beat you up. I felt as if this life wasn't worth living. I felt as though the world hated me.
Maybe sometimes
Sometimes you are rained on. You haven't eaten for like 2 days and you are hungry. That's what actually made me start using drugs, so that I could forget all my problems.
After years of struggling and doing odd jobs in construction, James was recruited into crime at the age of 15 by a man we shall call Mr. M.
So ndiye akaniambia mimi naweza kusaidia uachane na hii kazi.
He told me that he could help me leave this job and get another one. He said that he helps boys like me and can get me a job that pays me double.
Naweza kupea kazi na kuipa double.
Mr. M gave James more money than he'd ever seen. He rented him a new apartment, complete with furniture, and visited James regularly with parcels of food. One evening, Mr. M brought something else too.
In the bag, there was a gun.
He told James he would need to learn how to use it.
I sat back and weighed my options, and I figured I might as well team up with him. I didn't have any choice. He had given me food, everything I needed, money. He had given me a good life. I thought about the street life and realized I can't go back. So he told me I would go for training. We went all the way to Mogadishu. I wasn't alone. There were other boys, 26 of us.
When the boys returned to Nairobi, they got to work selling drugs and guns and hijacking expensive vehicles. James was earning about $300 a day. But his days of carjacking and gun running ended in bloodshed.
There was a confrontation and gunshots, and 3 boys died as I watched. So that's what made me see that this was not a good life.
James decided to leave the criminal underworld. He sought assistance from a priest who convinced him that if he surrendered the guns, all would be well. Instead, James was arrested by Kenya's anti-terror police unit and charged with possession of a firearm without a license and involvement in terrorist activities. James was still a teenager, but with no documents to prove this, he was detained alongside adults in a police cell. His case was heard in an adult court. He had no legal representation and was advised by police officers to plead guilty, even though he didn't fully understand the charges against him. James's experience with the police and the courts was in direct violation of established international law on the rights of children.
The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, or CRC, is an international treaty established to protect the rights of children across the world. It also provides key guidelines on children in conflict with the law. For example, Article 37 states that the arrest, detention or imprisonment of a child shall be used as a measure of last resort and for the shortest appropriate period of time. And every child deprived of liberty should be separated from adults. Article 40 states that youth involved in the justice procedure should receive legal representation and a speedy, impartial trial. Now, Kenya is a signatory to this convention and others, but sometimes there is a gap between policy and practice, something that juvenile justice advocates are fighting to change.
Advocate Elizabeth Njambi runs an organization called Wakilisha, meaning legal representation in Swahili. The organization links young offenders with a network of lawyers who represent them on a pro bono basis.
Some courts have tried to have in place pro bono mechanisms whereby advocates can sign up, but it's lacking in a majority of the courts in Kenya. So you'll find most children in conflict with the law. In fact, statistics say 80% of children in conflict with the law lack access to legal representation. 80%.
In James's case, a magistrate ordered an age assessment which found he was only 16. His case was moved from the High Court to the Children's Court. He was given a lawyer and tried as a minor. The age assessment saved him. had he been treated as an adult, James would have faced up to 10 years in prison for the firearm offence and a further 20 years, if not a life sentence, for his alleged involvement in terror activities. James spent 8 months at a detention facility for boys, an experience he described as rife with fighting among fellow detainees. But thanks to the intervention of juvenile justice advocates from Italian NGO, the European Committee for Training and Agriculture, or CEFA, he is now in a diversion program at this rehabilitation farm.
This is someone who is still developing into adulthood. So we are looking at maybe like even this is someone who can still be helped to be given a second chance in life. So like we are trying to give them maybe like even not just punishing them, but also helping them to understand that I committed a crime and maybe like even I need to take responsibility.
This progressive stance on rehabilitation and alternatives to formal incarceration is supported at the highest levels of Kenya's prison service.
We look at these institutions as correction centers, mostly for the juvenile. We have never looked at them as jails or institutions for destruction, but institutions for correction, so that they can find their way out, they can find their focus. It's just that a child who has lost focus, but this child can be given another chance.
According to the 2017 United Nations Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty, most children find themselves in detention due to a lack of social support systems and poor social and economic conditions, including poverty. Armed conflicts and natural disasters have also led to many children being separated from their family units and ending up in detention. The report further states that minors with links to criminal and terrorist gangs and those involved in sexual offences usually end up in custody. Some are also arrested during security sweeps. Kenya's Prison Services partnership with Italian NGO CEFA sees local social workers help juvenile offenders learn how to take responsibility for their actions while planning for their futures.
Counseling has helped a lot with the boy because he was able to open up, and a family reconciliation was done because he was not in good terms with the father, because he was blaming the father for whatever he was going through at that moment. But now I hear he's doing very well.
James is now 19 years old. In about a year, he'll be free to leave this farm and pursue his own dreams. Though his life has changed remarkably, he is still bitter with the police officers who arrested him.
It would have been better for them to understand the reason behind my involvement in crime, to investigate my story, understand my problems, and help me find a solution. You can't just arrest and throw someone into the cells. That doesn't help at all. Prison is not a good place.
James has had a tough life, but he is getting a second chance here. It's an example of the potential future of juvenile justice, where alternatives to criminal prosecution adopt a more holistic approach to rehabilitation while upskilling youth and allowing them a chance to contribute positively to society. Lindy Mtongana, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's now take a look at your business news. Here's what's ahead. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi demands a ban on issuance of new mining permits in the latest effort to fight fraud.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, President Felix Tshisekedi has demanded a ban on the issuing and trading of mining permits. This is until the country's mining registry has been audited. Tshisekedi has told his ministers that he wants to end the squandering of mining assets by unnamed political actors and officials so that the people of the DRC can benefit from the wealth of the country. The move is an escalation of Tshisekedi's ongoing review of deals struck by his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. Congo is the world's top producer of cobalt and Africa's biggest copper producer, but more than 70% of its people live on less than $1.90 per day. Motorists in Uganda are now paying more at the pump as fuel prices hit a new record high. There's a growing concern the prices are likely to continue climbing in the coming days, as Leon Senyange tells us.
Martin Seboliba refills his motorbike to run his day's errands. But the price at the pump has got him thinking twice to either get more fuel or less. Getting more means he has to dig deep into his pocket.
The fuel I use in a day has not decreased, but the price has increased. So definitely I spend a lot more money on fuel.
A litre of petrol now costs $1.25. Diesel about $1.15. The prices vary from gas station to another. It is already a pinch felt by motorists.
If I plan my journeys, I know I'm supposed to use a certain amount of fuel. But then you realize you have to fill more so that you can cover the same distance that will probably give you the same amount of money. It's really not so fair on our side.
The prices are about 20 cents higher than in April this year. Fuel dealers say the current rise is because of a limited supply of fuel products.
You can see economies are opening up. The rest of the world economies are opening up. Purely it is because the demand for products is rising and the supply is trying, but it is not catching up.
The knock-on effect of prices at the pump could be adverse.
The impact is there, but it is somehow shock absorbed by our food security system. Otherwise, if we were an economy that largely depends on industrial goods, it would be disaster. It would be disaster for us to be at this level with the fuel prices.
Uganda is slowly getting back on its feet following the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. But while more people get busier, the prospects of a quicker recovery could still be undermined by the rise of fuel prices. Experts predict price drops are not expected anytime soon. And with the December holidays drawing close, there will be tough travel and spending choices for many to make. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Qatar's journey towards hosting the 2022 FIFA World Cup is now just 1 year away. The opening match will take place on November the 21st, 2022 at the Al Bayt